Well, first of all, just a quick reminder that this weekend, all around the country, we're taking up a special collection to help the victims of Hurricane Ida down south. So as you exit church this morning, you'll see a basket on the right-hand side in the narthex for that purpose. So thank you for anything at all that you might be able to give. As I mentioned at the beginning of Mass, every year the first Sunday of October is designated by the church as Respect Life Sunday. And all of October is known as Respect Life Month. As Catholics, of course, our concern for life issues, though, is not restricted to just one day or 1 week or even 1 month out of the year. It's something that should be in our thoughts and in our prayers and in our actions every day, all year long. Our church's position on life is comprehensive and uncompromising because that is God's position on life. And that means that it should also be the position of every single Christian whose conscience is well formed. As Catholics, our defense of human life is comprehensive and uncompromising because we recognize that all life is a gift from God. And as His creatures, too, we also recognize that we're not masters of our own lives. We're not masters of our own destiny. No, we're subject to God Himself. In fact, whether we're aware of it or not, simply by being here today, by worshiping here together at Mass, by our very presence in this church, you and I are saying that I am pro-life. And that's because our worship at every Mass expresses our belief in the Trinity. So the Father, who calls Himself the living God, and the Son, Jesus, who is the way and the truth and the life, and the Holy Spirit, whom we'll recognize in the Creed in just a few moments as the Lord and giver of life. You know, all of this is simply a way of saying that to be Catholic is to be pro-life. To be Catholic is to stand with Christ. To stand with Christ is to stand for life. And to stand for life means to stand against anything and everything in our world that demeans or destroys human life. And as you know, there is nothing in our world today, no disease, no war, no natural disasters, which destroys more human life and demeans more of the living than the evil of abortion. You know, more children are killed by abortion every single year in our country than the total number of American soldiers killed in all the wars of our history combined. Let me say that again. More children are killed by abortion in our country every year than the total number of American soldiers killed in all the wars of our country's history combined. And that's every single year. Year after year after year after year. You know, the fact that abortion remains legal in our country and is accepted by so many folks and actually promoted and encouraged by our government, most egregiously here in our own state of Illinois, it's the great shame and disgrace of our time, of our era. It's a massive cloud which darkens the shining light that our country is supposed to be, that it used to be, which negates any moral standing that we might have in the world community, which, of course, is in direct opposition to the country envisioned by our founding fathers when they wrote the Constitution, the document which guarantees the right to life as the basis for all other rights. In other words, without the right to life, all other rights are meaningless, absolutely meaningless. We have, of course, as a country, faced other dark clouds over the years as well. For instance, March 6th, 1857, was a very dark day in our country's history. On that day, by a 7-2 vote, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that slaves were not actually persons, but were in fact property instead. So as such, the court ruled slaves could be legally bought and sold, they could be used, they could be beaten, they could even be killed with no recourse to the law whatsoever. So declared the highest court in our land. Thank God that 11 years later, the 14th Amendment to the Constitution eliminated that ruling and secured the rights of African Americans to full personhood in the eyes of the law. Slavery was overturned, and the equality of all people, regardless of race, was now upheld by the law. But remember this, though, too. It wasn't the law or that amendment that somehow granted slaves equality. They always had it. They always had it because God made it that way from the very beginning. All the 14th Amendment did was make sure that human law was finally brought into line with God's law. And of course, it was long, long, long overdue. But the darkest day of all in our country's history was January 22nd, 1973. On that day, ironically by another 7-2 vote, the U.S. Supreme Court said that the 14th Amendment does not apply to children during the first 9 months of their lives. That is, while they're living and growing in their mother's womb. It was a decision that was never requested by or approved by the American people. It was decided by only 7 men, based on a series of lies and bad law. Those 7 judges decided that a preborn child is not a person, and therefore not entitled to have their life protected by the laws of our land. And so once again, just like the slaves a century before, an entire category of people was denied protection. As a result, in most states to this day, it's legal for a mother to end the life of her child throughout the entire 9 months of pregnancy, for any reason whatsoever. And it happens here in the U.S. to approximately 1 million preborn babies every year. And the laws that allow that are unjust and immoral and criminal and offensive to God. Father Frank Pavone, who's from the Priests for Life, said, let's look at it this way. He said, we all know in our own lives, we all know someone named John, someone in our family, someone in our circle of friends, maybe a colleague. Well, what if we heard that a new law was passed which said that anyone named John could be put to death for any reason whatsoever? Now, anyone actually named John, of course, would obviously protest that so-called law, right? About it being unjust. But what about the rest of us, not named John? Wouldn't we all come together and fight to restore legal protection for everyone named John? Of course we would. Of course we would. And we would argue that this new so-called law was in fact against the Constitution, which claims to protect the rights of every citizen, no matter their name. But what if even the Constitution were changed to allow for that new law? Would we just kind of shrug our shoulders and say, well, that's the law of the land, there's not much we can do about it? Of course not. Of course not. Because the law would still be unjust. It would still be immoral. It would still be wrong. But the point is this, that some things are right and some things are wrong, no matter what any law or even the Constitution has to say about it. Every human law has to obey God's law, which isn't written on paper, of course, right? But on the heart of every human being who's ever lived. And it's a law which says that every human being, without exception, has the right to life, and that we may never, for any reason, kill an innocent human being. Of course, every preborn child, no matter the state of their health, no matter the circumstances of their conception, is an innocent human being. Both God's law and our Catholic faith are uncompromising on this point. It's not a question of our Catholic morality against someone else's morality. No, it's a question of morality itself. Killing the innocent is always wrong in every case, and no law, no Constitution can ever make it right. Now, going back to Father Pavone's story about people named John, it's not as far-fetched as we might think. Just change the name John to the word slave, and we're back to what happened in 1857. Or change the name John to the word Jew. We find ourselves in Nazi Germany during the 1930s and 40s. Now change the name John to the phrase preborn baby. And we find ourselves back on January 22nd, 1973, in the chambers of the Supreme Court. Whenever one child is the victim of abortion, we are all, in fact, victims. Every one of us. Because our life, yours and mine, is protected by the same principle that should protect that child's life too. The principle that all life is a gift from God. It's not a gift from the law or from the Constitution or from the government or from any elected official or any appointed judge. And if a society decides that that principle doesn't apply to one group of people, what's to prevent it from moving on to another group too? In other words, if it's legal to kill an innocent but unwanted child, well, then why not an innocent but unwanted disabled person? An innocent but unwanted terminally ill person? An innocent but unwanted elderly person? An innocent but unwanted neighbor, for that matter? In other words, either the right to life belongs to all of us, or it doesn't belong to any of us, not a one of us. That's precisely why the Declaration of Independence insists all men are created equal, and they are endowed by their Creator, not by the government, not by law. They're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, rights that can't be taken away. And among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Our country was founded, and our government exists to protect those God-given rights. Every human being, every child of God, throughout the entire spectrum of life, is in fact a person. And no one can be excluded from that group by the whims of a government or a society. No one can be excluded simply because they're an African American or a Jew or because they're a preborn child. And our baptismal calling, our very presence here today, our celebration of every Mass, obligates us to speak up for the most defenseless and voiceless of our brothers and sisters. When it comes to the protection of innocent human life, we're proud to say that God's law and our Catholic faith are uncompromising and unchanging. So today we renew our sense of responsibility for the weakest of our brothers and sisters. We renew our prayers for an end to abortion, and of course for the healing and the love and the peace of all those involved and affected by it, and for the triumph of the cultural life on all fronts, so that sooner rather than later we can be proud of our country on this point as well.